I've been going through the motions, every day a little bit the same. Another touch of gray. Never feeling deep emotion, never really breaking down the
Hello.
So what I'm searching for.
Tonight we're going to be sculpting a brand new sculpture. Drinking Pepsi out of a weird head. We have my wife here on the chat monitoring. Making this. There's my secret. I'll do a little sketch. You want to put that on the originally what they were using? I think it's you. We don't have it. Okay. Actually, so send it to you and then you cropped in the root.
This feelings of they're just waiting to be found, waiting to be
Tell me which of those is better.
I'm not gonna stop, I'm not gonna break until I find it. As long as there's another way, I'm gonna try it every day.
Pulling up my little reference. Got my crock pot going, so I'm just getting some clay soft and ready to work with.
Sleepless nights, I try to run, and I lie to a friend to let go. Close my eyes, I know there is no reason to run you running in the darkness inside you. See it so clearly now. I know.
Can I cover a ton of the? Do you want to put it over the base cam? That one's really not. Yeah, that's fine. That works for me. Anybody in chat or anything? Reference where I can see it too.
Why don't you tell us about what you're doing?
It's going to be rough in phase today. So the sculpt is going to move pretty fast. For a little bit, I'm doing a monster foot, kind of in the style of one of those kitschy old boot mugs. I know for the purposes of this piece, it's going to be a pretty thick cankle.
Is it burning?
Oh, the kiln is running.
No.
Oh. Well, the kiln is running. So we might hear a couple of alarms go off. We have an old manual style kiln that needs tending to. Just looking at some really large anatomy at the moment. The lumpy bits from the end of the ulna, or the end of the shin bones. Not the ulna, that would be the arm. Tibia. lump at the interior is higher and smaller. And that sort of ankle prominence on the exterior side. I know I'm going for kind of a mutant monster style foot. Kind of misshapen toes. Check my height. Yep, I got plenty of space. I can imagine this is the foot of some kind of a giant troll kind of monster. Something with a lot of sort of heft. Thick built kind of critter. Instead of having thin ankles and stuff. And that's mostly just so it'll be a nicer mug stuff. I want a good gap between the big toe and the other toes. Because I'm pretty sure I want that. I also planned sort of a almost vestigial little toe. Hoping Chuck will make it in tonight. He had a live video on Friday last week where he was making a cool monster mask. And we were chatting about some things to do with rough-in. How to keep your sculpt from getting confused and muddy early on. We will see. I also know this one's going to be a little unusual for me. I'm going to want to have more going on the bottom. Toes are an interesting shape, like a kind of weird little double wedge thing going on. Sometimes a real prominent first knuckle equivalent. Big toe to be a little different, sort of a slightly skinnier mid toe and a big old bulbous end. Can also move it. See, my armature is hollow. I made this up the other day. softer clay right out of the crock pot and stuff that empty space. That way some clay will get pushed in inside the armature a little bit stronger. This is going to be an interesting one to sculpt on stream. May have to make a bit of a sandbag or something. Just so I can get to the bottom.
We do actually have, I think it's supposed to be like a bean bag. It's like a bean bag. It's like,
That might look, well, I might make something anyway just to keep the clay off of it.
I just put it in
Another bag, yeah, I guess.
a pillowcase or something.
I suppose that could work too.
Do you want me to do that?
No, I don't need it tonight. I'll need it eventually, but not tonight. Working on the top surface primarily tonight. Camera's gonna have a hard time keeping up with focus if we move it around a ton. Especially to keep the hood up. Keep some of the shine going off my head. Being interfering. The last sculpt worked on stream, the Yummy Mummy, is getting close to being ready to mold. Got it marked out. And I think most of the little undercuts and things are handled. I'm going to want to keep this Achilles tendon kind of prominent, I think. There's going to be some, well, as I'm conceiving it now anyway, some really thick, kind of wrinkly, calloused skin at the back of the ankle. It's going to run across that. pretty good strong instep arch too. I know a lot of people, when they sculpt, tend to like to avoid using tools for a long time. I don't find that to be as efficient, especially with the harder clays. I think I have an idea where that advice comes from, like conceptually, but I do not tend to hold with it. I think it's something somebody recommended to keep people from getting too caught up in too much detail too early. I don't think it's necessarily about tools. I just do whatever is working for the most part. I find I work with my hands at the detail stage quite a lot. And the tools pretty early on also. And that might have a lot to do with harder clay I like to sculpt with. It's not easy to push this stuff around with your bare hands always. Can't really see what I'm doing down there. So what I'm doing off camera is I'm using my big glass palette to take clay that's out of the crock pot and a little too melty for what I need, and cool it off rapidly. So I get nice and malleable, but not so liquidy you have to use a trowel to move it. a lot of people prefer a hot box sort of setup so they can control their temp a little better and kind of keep the clay all kind of soft, malleable, but not melty. I actually find that having different softnesses of clay that I can get at really easy, quite helpful. So I don't mind if the crock pot melts it a little. How are your projects going, wife? You working on anything today? Good. Build up. How's it looking on cam? You see pretty well?
The drawing's kind of
Drawing a little.
cop blocking shit.
Well, we can take that time. It's not useful. Tell if that big toe is going to be too much outsized. But we will see. trim out a bit too. Been looking up a lot of pictures of weird feet for this project.
That's an interesting search history.
I would think so. Right now I'm trying to put down into some different little planes. They might need to be blended together a bit later, but I like to leave this sort of thing a little exaggerated early on. And by planes, I mean sort of the sharp delineation between the way the foot slopes in after this kind of a tendon that runs across to each of the toes and kind of this fashion. There's a bunch of extra meaty stuff out here. It isn't very bony, but I'll try and kind of leave distinct angles where things change direction or go from sort of softer, fleshy bits to bony prominences and things like that. Because it helps kind of evaluate the shapes that you're making if you can just see them a bit better. Kind of the same way that sometimes if you're looking up, trying to do a portrait and you have a bunch of reference and then you can find like a caricature or something like that, kind of see things more clearly because they're exaggerated. Busted out one of the tools that I don't use all that frequently anymore because it's more appropriate, I find, for softer clays. This thing, which is just a piece of banding, like steel banding that you get with construction materials, that I've cut into shape and notched. Don't know if you can see that on cam, but there's a bunch of little divots. I don't know if I can show it to that one and have it be in focus and big. Does that show
Okay,
that?
not big, but yeah.
I just notched it every so often with a cutoff wheel with a Dremel tool. Gives it a tooth. You can see the pattern that it makes. Probably better than you can actually see the teeth.
Kind of a pointy metal rib of death.
It's a pointy metal rib of death. It's just a much more abruptly shaped toothed rib, which that's this tool, the toothed rib. I don't know if that helps having my hand behind it or hurts, but I found these were a little too flexy most of the time for sculpting, and the teeth are so deep that I wasn't able to remove material, and I got a bunch of these little hairy, little fuzzy deals. Like way more with this. This is, yeah, clay boogers. This is much more of a potter's tool. So I made this one. I've made several of this one. But I also like it's got a rounded end and pointy end, and the serrations carry down through. I tried doing some with serrations all the way around, but I never used the flat, and it was just less comfortable to hold. But all of that section is serrated on both sides. And this one, so I get a nice variety of marks. The only downside with it is with much harder clays, it's just harder on your hands because you're having to hold it and pull against. So I switched to rates like this. It's the same basic pattern, but it allows me to kind of pull along the length of the tool, and I find it more comfortable to use. There may be a bit of a leverage thing involved. I like for this early stuff, I like a squared off rake because that sort of facilitates the delineating little different sections, changing when I'm going to change angle and stuff, keeping things more clear. And these rounded ones are good for like generally smoothing the form. This gives you a better, easier to make marks with, I think is the best way to put it. If I want to make a little indication of where this is going to turn, where the, where the shin bone is going to be. This tool is nice and fast to switch between all the different shapes you can get out of it. The different sculpting surfaces. since I've been doing the mugs, I don't sculpt a lot of feet. Lots of faces, but not so many feet. To refer back to my anatomy a bit more, maybe. So does that idea make sense for like defining all the planes on this? We're exaggerating when things turn. I think a lot of times we use terms and things as artists that just.
You want to run me through it again?
Yeah, sure.
No, that was 10 minutes ago.
So when Chuck and I were chatting after his last video, when he was doing some of his initial breaking, there were some points where he was smoothing across some forms that he wanted to make. And I always find that in my sculpting, I like to keep these sort of early stages almost kind of a little bit geometric.
Mm-hmm.
Like even to the point of like squaring off things in an artificial kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it helps me when it's in a rough state like this, it kind of helps me see what I'm looking at better. It helps me conceptualize
That makes sense.
what those shapes are going to be. Not everybody works like that. Obviously, some people like to kind of do a thing and then smooth it all out, almost like going over a. Did you ever do an assignment where you did like a pencil or charcoal drawing and then kind of like rubbed it all in? Used to do it in figure drawing sometimes, so it would take all of the detail down.
Yeah, I don't remember. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, we used to do that one. I used to teach that assignment and I found it fairly effective. It was just, you would simply do your drawing and then sort of lazily erase essentially the whole thing if it was in pencil.
Okay.
I don't know why a lot of students really, this is what I was teaching in my graduate work, a lot of students preferred like graphite to Conti crayon or charcoal. Like it's just a familiarity thing.
Yeah.
So I used to let them draw with whatever they liked best. But yeah, having them do a drawing from a model, work on it for.
Chuck's here.
Oh, hello, Chuck. We were just talking about you. But yeah, doing the thing where we would let the students work from the model for 5 or 10 minutes, and then kind of erase the drawing, give the model a rest, and have the model come right back into the same pose, and you work into the now really muddy drawing, and it oftentimes helps you see where you need to correct things.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like a version of like squinting down your eyes or blurring.
Yeah,
blurring
it's
your
exactly
eyes.
the same thing. It's just
Trying to get like the masses.
Yeah, you're trying to get the masses. I think the primary reason why doing it on. Yes, please. The middle two elements, do the lower of the middle two elements. Put that on. Thank you, Pi. I can see that you chatted something, Chuck, but I can't see what it is from here. Angie will be back in just a moment.
Okay.
What is it that Chuck?
Huh?
Did Chuck say something new?
No.
No. Okay. I thought I can see that. I can see that there is chat, but I can't see. Hmm? But yeah, the key thing about I found when I was teaching, you can tell people to squint and do that thing, and it kind of feels unnatural at first. So a lot of students just kind of think they do it, and then they don't work with it. They don't do anything with it. They're just doing it because you told them to, and not kind of understanding the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And you also can't really see if they're doing it in a way that's effective. But with, okay, now erase your drawing, I can definitely see that they did. And I can see if they did it enough to make a difference as an instructor, which is helpful sometimes. Yeah, this is kind of sort of the sculpture version of that, just working these down in terms of planes. Some people go really exaggerated with it, like really, really square everything off, and then
I often forget to do that, but I often look at it from afar.
Ah, that's good. Yeah, the squinting thing is good. Mirrors are good, and photographs also work pretty well for just giving you that newer perspective. Another thing that I really like as a sculptor is colored lights. Yeah, because when you have a sculpture, it's easier to see if you have good directional light on it. But if I didn't have that green colored light on, I would have really strong shadows. They'd be less strong right now because we're filming than they would be if I was just working, because I would have an even more directional light on it. But sometimes when you do that, the shadows get dark enough that it's actually hard to see what you're doing. So a good way to see how those planes turn over is by using one or two colored lights. Like I used to use like a green and a red light, or something from different sides so that I could still see what I was doing because it's still illuminated, but I could really see those what would be shadowy delineations.
Chuck says, filming helps me a lot. Never thought about colors.
It's not bad.
So basically the shadows from the different
Yeah,
angles helps
the different colored lights
differentiate which shadows are which.
show you where the shadows would be without you having to have shadows so dark you can't see what you're doing.
Right.
I figured that out while I was working back home in my very makeshift studio space in the bedroom. But yeah, specifically the thing that I wanted to show Chuck was this guy, because I gave Chuck a tool just like this. Because Chuck works with wet clay, and this thing is brilliant for working out the planes because it has lots of different angles that you can use. So I've got the little rounded bit here. Does a really good job for making these sort of hollow shapes. Not hollow. Concave. I play concave and convex shapes off one another often. I guess colloquially, you think of just like hollows in your cheeks or things like that, but hollow is the wrong term. You want to be accurate as much as we can. But yeah, I like
with your innies and your outies.
Yes, innies and I like the innies and the outies. I want to do. I will contrast innies and outies quite a lot, especially at this stage.
You're welcome.
Because it does help you see. And this tool is very fast for doing that because it's got a reasonably broad face and a reasonably broad section and reasonably narrow ones right next to each other. The only reason I don't use it much anymore is because the way you hold it when you're sculpting, you have to pinch it and hold it a little tighter because it wants to like torque in your grip, right? So it's just tiring on my hands at this point. But when I worked with water-based clays and wet clay, I used to do practically my whole rough-in with a tool like this, because I could get those, many different tools, and I don't have to switch tools at all, and I don't have to. Well, it's like having many tools without putting down, picking up, putting down, picking up. I just, when I want an innie, I use this. When I want an outie, I might use this shape.
So glad you brought that tool up. I keep getting it out, but never actually found a use for it yet. For the concave, it seems great.
Yep, it's very, very handy for that. And like I said, I just found it to be very fast. Now you might find that this is it just doesn't fit you. Your hand doesn't want to do that kind of thing. A nice squared off rake. This is just a cheap tool that I cut teeth into. That'll also help encourage this sort of planes. That's what I use more now. And it doesn't have to be as squared off as this one. This was one of my old ones that I made and broken and fixed, but this one is one that I made that has just a little bit of an angle and it's just a little squared off. That works just fine. So like a squared off rake is good for those angles too. And this one I have a square and a circle again, so I can come in here and do the innies and the outies where I want them. But the important thing is just when I'm working early, I like to do almost exaggerating the innies and the outies. Just because it helps me see and helps me evaluate my shapes better. I'm not one of those, I don't know, just general rant time, I guess. So one thing that I've seen just too much, I think, is when people are giving like art advice or art instruction, they give really big blanket statements like, you know, one of the ones I hear most often is, don't use your tools until you've exhausted the possibilities of what you can do with your hands. When the shapes get so small that your little fingers can't get in there, then you can break out the tools and your sculpture will be better. I don't think that's true at all. I think it's true that you can do a lot with your hands, and it is good and it is fast, but there's nothing wrong with busting into a tool and doing the job that the tool is good for when it comes up, instead of going, no, I can't do this yet. I need to work with my clumsy little fingers for another 20 minutes or a half an hour, and then I'm allowed to use my tools. It's not as bad with softer clays, but with this harder stuff, you know, if I wanted to decide where one toe ends and the other toe starts, like, I can get the tool out, switch to a more detail type tool, and I can get that job done just like that. That's not adding detail that I can't work around. I'm not precious with that. It was fast. But if I had to get in here and dig it out with my fingernails, no, don't do that kind of stuff. Do what makes sense. And another thing that I've seen people do in kind of a blanket statement way is you'll see people that insist on building up, especially with drawing, with like basic forms. Like, you have to start with this kind of weird trapezoid thing. If you're going to draw a hand, you always start with that weird trapezoid, and then you draw a ball on the end and more balls for the knuckles and this whole constructive thing. And it's like, you can do that sometimes if it's necessary. If you're having difficulty conceptualizing a part, you don't have a model, yeah, go ahead, use that stuff. It doesn't hurt to know how to do some of it, break things down into smaller shapes, but you don't always have to. And when you're doing like this kind of sculpting, I could come in here and really cut these planes in. And build these, like, I've seen people literally doing stuff like this, where they're carving these like geometric shapes. And if it works for them, that's fine. But when you're teaching people that you have to do, you have to cut these shapes in, you have to make an artificially square block thing. You don't have to do that. You can have like a little something to show you where those planes are, even if it's just making marks that go one direction and another direction to show, so that you can have something to look at. Like that works. All sorts of stuff works.
I learned sculpting a face by starting with the skull and build up from there. Good to know, but not necessary indeed.
No. And it's also the thing that I find the most difficult about starting with the skull is a lot of people don't explain properly the variations in skulls. Like I have a couple of yes. Well, I have a couple of anatomical model skulls, and they are quite different, and they're still very much normal skulls. So if you're telling your students, and a lot of teachers do, like, you make a skull with, there's like the 2 eggs method. If you imagine the face region is sort of like an egg standing up on its skinny end. So you've got the pointy chin and the big bulbous thing. And then if you take another egg and lay it the long way and sort of impose them on each other, you will get, let me just grab my skull, it's easier. Oh, this is my little skull. That was my friend Reese printed for me with his 3D printer. And so you'll have one egg that's formed this way and one that's formed this way, and you can break that down into all different shapes. But not every skull is even close to any other skull. And that's not even getting into people who have really unusual shaped heads. That's just normal heads. Which I think that's not supposed to be on there, but anyway. But yeah, like this shape head, this person has very little bridge of the nose. The shape of the eyes are most likely a male skull, is what this was sort of based on. Although the brow ridges are very, very flat. And even that's not science or anything. That's just sort of statistical closeness. Like a real anthropologist would tell you can't tell from a person's skull whether it's a male or a female, or definitely not what race they are, or any of that kind of nonsense.
Want to hear something funny?
What's that?
I saw a meme the other day. I think they redesigned Shrek or something, and somebody was trying to point out how they feminized Shrek, and I think with the little graphs they were trying to show that the eyes were closer set and something. I don't know. It was goofy, but it was something to do with implying that women's eyes are closer together.
I've not personally heard that one.
I know, either have I.
But I mean, I have heard things that are kind of true some of the time, like that women have typically smaller, pointier chins.
Yes.
They don't have prominent brow ridges. You can tell. You're supposed to be able to tell the difference between a male and a female skull, and you can guess, like more often than not, if you find a slightly smaller skull with.
Chuck says you'll have to catch the rest on YouTube tomorrow.
Oh, have a good night, Chuck.
So make sure to upload this to YouTube for tomorrow.
Yeah, it might not be tomorrow, but it'll be soon, Chuck.
I do my best.
Have a good night, man.
Yeah, he threw my skull out in the woods. I had like, yeah, I'll just find it someday. Just throw them the fuck off.
I watched a video of a woman who was reconstructing a skull.
Was it bones? Was it bones?
No, it wasn't bones. It was an actual scientist. And she was reconstructing a skull based on the sort of current but a little bit outdated methodology. And the funny thing was, she had done research on the accuracy of.
Before I finally talk about skull and sculpting foot.
I mean, yeah, it is true. It's just because nobody gets obsessive about weird feet.
I'm sorry?
Let me rephrase that. There isn't a lot of very blanket art advice about feet. For artists, I'm sure there's blanket advice about feet for people that are really into feet.
Yeah.
But yeah, this I wish I could remember the video. She was a researcher out of Australia or New Zealand, and she had done a bunch of work on the veracity of facial reconstructions.
Mm-hmm.
And
so do you mean when they like artistically create your face based off of
like the police come to you with a skull and they say, we need to know what this person looked like so we can put out a flyer.
Yeah.
And when she first started doing her work, and that was largely what she was doing, she had some pretty good success, but she eventually thought, well, how often does this work well? Like, what are the odds that you have a skull and you have a reference picture? Like, how close do you actually get? And there wasn't a lot of research done in that way. No one had bothered.
No one had thought to check their work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not enough people had thought to check their work.
Okay.
So she set about doing a lot of that checking. So she was checking some of the assumptions on things like the depth of certain flesh markers and things. And she was finding that some of many of the markers that were given, I don't know if people know how this sort of thing is done, but in forensic facial reconstruction, you will have tables. So you have your skull, and then you will have these like tables that tell you that over the mandible for a skull of a given age or whatever, the meat is one depth, and they'll put these little bumps. They'll stick these little bumps on, and there'll be little things. I actually had a kit at home. It was like the child's first facial reconstruction kit thing. It was actually it was a horse's skull, weirdly enough. but it's got all these little bumps. And you put all these little bumps on, and then you got a skull that looks like.
So here it's like 3 millimeters.
Yeah.
And here it's like 5.
Yeah, and it's based on observations and things.
Sure.
But yeah, you end up with a skull that kind of looks like Pinhead had a baby with a like a bingo ball.
Somebody's crafting drawer.
Like it's got all these little bumps with numbers on usually.
Yeah.
So you've got this, and she was finding that a lot of the data points that they had were derived from like 1 or 2 examples, and no one had bothered to go back and check with more examples. She found some examples that were written down where people had just straight up changed the numbers, like they made a clerical error. So you had the like research notes from the people who were going, the meat is 3 millimeters here and 5 millimeters here, and then when it went to publishing, it was 3 millimeters here and 5 millimeters here. And it wasn't great scientifically. So she was doing a reproduction of this, or a reconstruction of this skull that she had. And she was saying, this is like I'm doing this the way that I would normally go about this. Faster, but this is how I would do it. And then they brought out the museum collection that donated the cast of the skull. She wasn't working on an actual skull. Brought out the information because they knew who the person was. They knew whose skull it was.
Yeah.
And it turned out that she wasn't a man. She was a woman. She wasn't in her mid 50s. She was in her 30s. She was like a housemaid for someone, and had worked in like the laundry, and she didn't have family or whatever when she passed, so the person who owned the house that she worked at was a physician and was like,
I'm gonna keep this
because she didn't have anybody to bury her or whatever. So yeah, it just ended up,
some people stuff their pets.
Some people stuff their pets. I'm not gonna say, because they didn't say whether or not this was a sort of, do you mind if we keep your bony bits after you die kind of scenario. Whether there was consent involved, there could have been. I wouldn't care to speculate because I wouldn't know. But there may not have been. And that would have been a thing at the time. But yeah, a lot of that data is quite skewed. And some of it is skewed for reasons of small sample sizes. Some of it is skewed for reasons of when they started doing the work. Because one of the things that the scientist was pointing out was, when a lot of the initial foundational work on facial reconstruction was being done, it was being done in England, and it was being done on bones from certain museum collections, and a lot of the bones from those museum collections came from poor people in India, because they used to put the bodies into the Ganges River. That was the traditional burial form, and people would just scoop them up downstream.
It's good old pool strainer out.
And just kind of wash the goopy bits off and sell off the bones. It was a cheap place to get, full skeletons. So a lot of the work was done on people that were, from a specific place. They had specific, dietary things that made, sizes and things would tend to be very different on very different populations. And she found that a lot of the stuff that she was doing was not particularly scientifically justified. She still had some reasonable success. She was one of those people that was like, I had this police investigation and we looked for the person based on this thing, based on this reproduction that I'd done, and then they found the identity of the missing person from that reproduction. So it's not like it doesn't ever work, but it doesn't always work. And that's, most of that stuff is based on kind of statistical probabilities. I imagine a Ron Perlman skull looks a whole lot different than a Johnny Depp skull or a Nicolas Cage skull. So when I've done build up from the skull type sculpting, which I rarely do, I do it very roughly. But there is something to be said for thinking about your anatomy early on. And I suspect that's where a lot of that advice comes from. It's, trying to encourage people to think about the big forms, think about the anatomy, and a way to encourage them to do that is, not getting out your tiny detail tools too early, or think about the bony mass. I can remember having a model that was very heavy for one of my drawing classes, or it was painting classes at the university that I was teaching, and I had a couple of students that had picked up a lot of that. I need to find where the collarbones are. I need to find the sternal process down here. You can see that occasionally. You can see there's a couple of bony marks, hips and things, that people would be like, you can always find those. And it was enlightening for a couple of those students to look at this particular model and find the hip bone. It's in there. You can definitely conceptualize it, but I couldn't see it. I could see a lot of a lot of very obvious shapes that I could do, that I could use for measuring. I just had to be flexible and work from those observations and not dogmatic about which points I was using. No harder to draw or paint someone that's a different size than your most average, unless you're insistent on looking for some landmarks that are only apparent on the skinny people, and then only when they're in certain poses.
No.
No what? Oh, did we get more fun bot action? What is it this time?
Nothing.
Nothing? Now that I've got this tool out, I keep wanting to use it. I'll regret this tomorrow. When my hands are all sore.
Mm.
It'll probably be okay for now. Got to take good care of your hands when you're doing this sort of work. I was pretty lucky. I had a cortisone injection in my wrist this spring. No, last spring, about a year, right around a year or so. It may have been in April last year, but that worked well. The doctor said sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it lasts, sometimes it doesn't. But I went from completely unable to tip my wrist this way to just about free movement in it. Like if I tucked my finger in even this much, it physically couldn't be moved. Not good. Didn't feel great. Like a 4 out of 10. I couldn't recommend it. And that was all just based on the repetitive sculpting, casting things. This monster making work. I didn't have an injury or anything to explain it with. These. And I have some good definition and movement in these toes. I kind of like this shape that you get with some people where the toe ramps. You can't see it. The toe sort of ramps up from the last little section. It kind of, I can't do it with a finger. These fingers don't do that. My fingers don't do that. You have this the little end section with the nail, and then a strong bump on this area. I find that looks cool often. I like that sort of clawy, kind of grippy gesture. I'm also giving this sculpt kind of a pushed off to the side little baby toe.
Mm. With mine?
Hmm?
With mine?
No, you have a little tucked in mutant baby toe. This is a, like all on its own team mutant baby toe.
Okay.
This is some interesting footwear choices. Kind of monster feet right here. There's probably a drag queen phrase for toes that do some of this weird stuff.
I mean, there's cliffhangers, but that's a very specific.
That's a shoes thing. Come in here and get some good movement in these toes, I hope. We will see how this goes. Right now I'm conceiving of kind of I don't want to call it a troll monster, but some slightly ape-like features with the strong gap between the toes, almost like halfway to a prehensile thing. But I still wanted this big toe kind of in line with the foot more. On an ape, it would tend to be more this direction. You tend to come up like that. Grab the more thummy, typically. Yeah. I don't know. This critter is going to go with primarily bipedal. But heavy. Stocky and may want some more fun features going on in here. Just see where this goes. I don't mind letting this sculpt develop. Give my Bob Ross on. I have to know exactly what you're doing. Just put things there. Just put stuff wherever you put it. Happy little accident trees. Happy little tree accident. That's about right, isn't it? Happy little tree accident.
Mm-hmm.
I do think I want this. other thing to get used to with monster clay. It's not that sticky. It sticks to itself well if you kind of work it in, but it's easy to like put pieces of clay on and then have them not really stay. I want a smaller toe. Now he's getting more like your weird little toe. Very weird little toe. Very, very little. Very weird. That looks kind of fun. Kind of getting there. Not sure how much this hood keeps the glare off my head from interfering with the camera, but I feel like I should be in some kind of a Tolkien podcast. This ridiculous hood. I'm also just
take a little effort next time to make sure the lights are proper.
well, the lights are proper for this guy.
Well, okay, the lights being proper, and then the camera can be tilted down a little bit.
Mm. I'm not that used to looking at me. It's weird. I don't do that much. I know that I'm going to want to do a lot of cool texture on this foot. That's one thing I know that's going to happen. I don't work in quite this scale that often. This one will be a nice change to do some bigger textures again. Oh, jeez. It's like I think the camera's broken. I was trying to look at.
Oh no, that's the stream. So
Yeah.
it's delayed.
Yeah, long delay.
A little bit. Do you want the other one?
No, it's fine. Just keep spinning it for a second. Just looking over at the actual stream. I can see. Oh, just can't do that. Okay. Nothing. I was using the camera to see what I was doing on the sculpt a little bit.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay.
Trying to turn it and then I go, oh yeah, I should look back at that thing. Well, yeah, I'll look back at that thing in about 2 minutes when it comes around. Once we get past the delay. I wonder if that's some technical delay thing or some kind of like gotta run it past the bots first to make sure there's not a nipple somewhere. You should have checked the Twitch terms of service before I started sculpting on this. I don't know how Twitch feels about feet content. Knowing most media stuff, a horrific severed foot is fine, but a boobie would be terrible. You couldn't have that. It's too bad we can't have that sort of thing. There might still be. There was a thing on YouTube that was doing timed drawing session things with a model. I forget the name of the channel. That was handy when it was the COVID times. We couldn't do figure drawing and that kind of thing.
Great. Yes.
It would have been helpful for people. Yes. Yes, we have approximately 7 minutes, according to my timer for the kiln. I could knock off a little early. Doing the kiln. Go for a little walkies because it's nice out. It is warm in Canada today. Warmer. Well, it's 15 degrees Canada and approximately 40 degrees. I want to say 40 degrees freedom because that was the old joke, but it doesn't work anymore. 40 degrees in
Fascist.
neo-fascist units. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how that whole thing goes. Hopefully not too fascist too long. What are you gonna do? significantly warmer anyway than it has been.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe by next stream I will have more concretely figured out what kind of meat foot I'm working on. Sometimes that helps the sculpture. Having a stronger concept of what I'm making. Sometimes it's just fine if it just looks cool. Can live with looks cool. I don't think that's too much. Yeah. Angle. Exaggerated a
It
little.
looks like the skin has been sloppy and it's puddling around the ankle.
Yes.
Is what it looks like to me. Whether or not that's a bad thing,
Well, I was more thinking the
it's like he's wearing slouchy skin.
it could be kind of cool.
Yeah. So it depends on whether it's a bad thing to you or not.
I was more thinking the angle in the bones,
Mm-hmm.
the bony prominences is a little exaggerated for what is typical, but
Okay.
maybe it's a twisted. Twisted foot. Maybe some kind of witch's foot. Get a witch's foot. Get some. Get some talon. Toe claws. Maybe a little. Kind of nasty, infected. What do they call that part where the fingernail meets the meat? Yeah. Cuticle. Infected cuticle meat. Get that gross infected cuticle. That's which one? So got about a minute or two. Thinking about which. If anybody's watching this between now and next sculpt, thinking about which feet. Feel free to hit us up with what which feet would have. I don't know what which feet got. There's probably something. There's probably some folklore explanation for weird witch feet. look into that. Okay, my alarm is just about to go off. It is 10.
So
we
shall we sign off?
we should probably sign off. We've got some hoot happened.
We do.
And a toe didn't come off, so that was good.
Say Tuesday, so we'll be back on Thursday.
We'll be back on Thursday. Thursday night.
All right, later, folks.